Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm excited to share the word, to spread the word about the Unjournal, and what we're doing, why we're doing it. I want people to be aware of it and to get feedback, of course. So just to be clear, everyone's seeing my screen, but they're not seeing the infinite view. You're not seeing Zoom content in the lower right, are you? Good.
Yeah, all good.
All right, terrific. So yeah, well, first of all, I think I said that already. Thanks for having me. I'm coming from Massachusetts. I'm devoting almost all my time to the Unjournal now. I come from a economics background, taught in the United Kingdom, did research in the United Kingdom for 15 years, worked at Rethink Priorities for a few years, and now I'm focusing on this. You can see my background at this link. All these slides are available online. You're welcome to add comments, questions on the slides, although we're using the Slido for now. And yeah, if you want answers to sort of just quick answers to your questions, complete answers to your questions about the Unjournal, go to unjournal.org. And there's even like an AI chat feature we have enabled. Someone's mic has a little background noise. So you can say, who is behind this? Question mark. Let's see if it's maybe it doesn't think that. What does the Unjournal cost? Whatever, that doesn't really make any sense, but you see the idea. So it tries to answer the question and gives you links. That wasn't a great question, sorry. Moving along, I just want to start by reminding people what the Unjournal is. I'm not sure when I'm presenting this, I don't know how much what people already know about the Unjournal, what people already know about academic research, publication processes in economics and other fields. So I'll give a little bit of background here, but feel free to give me suggestions and let me know if anything I say is just really confusing. You can ask it in the chat, I guess. So when I tell people about the Unjournal, or when people say, hey, how's your journal going? I say, no, it's called the Unjournal. It's not a journal. The idea is we're not publishing anything, and I don't think publishing as a concept makes a lot of sense here. We're coordinating and funding the public evaluation of research projects, and these research projects can be in any format, not just frozen PDFs. It can be code and data presentations. It can be interactive. We're building an open system for evaluation, feedback, ratings, and assessment. There's a quantifiability to it, which maybe I'll get to in a moment. And we're focusing, what is our domain? We might expand, but for now we're focusing on quantitative work, basically in social science, economics, things having to do with humans, behavior, and the consequences, that informs global priorities. I forgot that bit of, yeah. All right, and yeah, as I said, you can see an introduction to what we do in a nutshell here, a little pitch down there. And you can see the output of our work. We're through our pilot phase. We've evaluated 10 papers, or projects as I like to call them. We've commissioned the evaluation of 10 of these. You can see all the output here. We're trying to feed this into the bibliometric ecosystem so everyone can see all of the evaluations, responses that were done, and it's going to sort of flood the zone. We're going to be scaling up to our year goal of doing 70, sorry, this didn't, 70 papers in the next year. Sorry, this slide didn't come out as well as I hoped. So just to give you a background, what is academic peer review? How does quality control, how do careers work in academia? In economics, it works more or less like this. People release a working paper on NBER if they're in a prestigious club, or generally on REPEC. They release their work maybe as a linked PDF. People can read it, but there's lots of papers out there. It doesn't have any cachet. It doesn't have any, no one knows what the quality of it, or at least there's no explicit discussion of the quality, the use, how to eat it. And then they have to submit to a sequence of journals in complicated ways. And that process leaves them in their career in the dark. They don't get any value of that until they get the publication. And it leads anyone looking at these papers in the dark, because you don't know how much to value it. You don't know whether it's credible or not. And even at the end, you only know what journal, and I hate this expression, your paper found a home in or landed in. You don't know why. You don't know what the editor or the reviewers liked about it. Sorry, this slide was meant to illustrate I redo this slide later, so sorry. Okay, so that was sort of just trying to give you a little bit of background. Sorry if it's old news to some of you. What are the main ingredients of the Unjournal? What we're doing differently from traditional systems? And I admit there are some other people doing some similar things, not so much though in social science, economics, policy, not with the impact focus, and they're not doing many of these elements. So peer community in is a strong initiative in this. I think they call it publish, evaluate, curate model. So we let people submit their papers, their projects, I like to say, or we identify and select it. Then we prioritize it. We have a team that's like, which research is highly impactful, which research has the greatest value of evaluation. Then I'll show you this process later if I have a chance. We have people manage this. We have them find expert evaluators and pay them at least $400 to do their work. We elicit quantifiable and comparable metrics. We ask them to rate it on things like relative to all of the papers you've read, where does this rank by these different categories? All of the evaluation, both they're going to write a report, then we're also going to we emphasize certain aspects that they should focus on in terms of what's important to rate about this, but also they're descriptive. That all is made public. I showed you where. All of this is based. Well, these two things are very different, and paying is not what happens in academia. Usually referees are grudgingly doing it, or they're doing the work because they want to appeal to an editor. We don't claim ownership of the work. We don't publish it. It's hosted somewhere. It has to be hosted on a publicly accessible archive. You can, if you want to, you could submit it to a traditional journal later. You could also upgrade it for future evaluation. And we are offering some financial prizes both to authors and to evaluators, and we're emphasizing the transparency of our processes. Okay, so now what are we trying to do, and how does it relate to effective altruism, global priorities? The thing is, our theory of change is maybe a little bit, I don't say complicated, but the point is that there's this problem, let's say in academia, there's a problem or limitation in effective altruism and its research and what people are trying to get from it. And I think those problems synergize. Each can help each other. You can solve both together by leveraging the strengths and weaknesses of the other. That's the case I'm making. So what I'll call EA research or effective altruism EA, research is core to what EA has done traditionally and what it's hoping to do now. People who identify themselves as adjacent or within EA. For instance, one of the things they want to say is, what is the most impactful intervention? What's the most impactful action? What's the most impactful use of funds? They want rigorous answers to that and take their decisions and their funding based on that. That's profoundly a research question. So they rely either on academic research or doing their own research, but that research that EA's organizations and people adjacent to EA do themselves often struggles with rigor, external credibility. So, we want people in EA want the research to be also not just to know that they're doing the right thing, but also they often might want to influence regulators and others. So they want the research that they're funding and doing to be credible. But also what research organizations to fund. Okay, so what else? Academia conducts adjacent or impactful or research that could be impactful, perhaps with a little bit of tweaking or with a little bit of reporting costs. Then you can do a cost-benefit analysis. Not all of it is impactful, but some of it is or could be, and many academics would be happy to switch to doing more impactful research if it still met their career goals. Academia has tremendous resources. It has expertise, it has cachet, it has connections. And as I'll argue, and I think is not a heavy lift, I'm sure most people have encountered ways in which traditional journals and academic peer review is broken. Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but I won't belabor it because it feels like preaching to choir. All right, so the solution is, why do we have all of these hundreds or thousands of journals that have arisen over the decades, and a complicated system of where do we submit and If we were going to design a system from scratch, you wouldn't have 200 journals in economics. You'd have a few places to have research evaluated. So the solution I propose is we're funding direct public evaluation of particularly global priorities relevant research to address many limitations of the outdated system, Academics, if they could switch, would be happy to switch to a better system. They just don't know that they can do it on their own. And leveraging this new system to some extent to shift attention and resources towards impact. And I'll get to our full maps, paths of theory of change. You see a link below. Anything else I want to say on that? We've made progress already. The problem in academic with peer review and journals is different in different fields. But in economics, it's very slow, it's opaque, it's noisy, it adds randomness, it encourages a lot of game playing. In psychology, it's fast and often perhaps not as rigorous as it could be. In legal scholarship, there's a different problem, but we're not doing legal scholarship. I'll get to them. Okay. So you can see, by the way, you can see some of what I wanted to say in the speaker's notes. I'm going a little bit quickly here. Okay, so how could I convince someone that the Unjournal has value? Well, you have to believe that research matters. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Rigorous empirical, specifically rigorous empirical and quantitative research in social science, et cetera, can benefit global priorities, global prioritization, can influence and direct policy. Rigor matters, expertise matters, including what we might call academic and PhD level expertise. Engaging with academia, engaging with research institutions can help. And I think some people will have some skepticism about that. And it's not easy for me to argue that quickly, they're sort of going to be on a case-by-case basis. Thirdly, peer review or evaluation in some format can add value to research, including by helping research users filter what research to read, characterize what aspects of the research are relevant to their own use. And that could also include other researchers as well as policymakers who wants to use techniques from the research. You have to agree the status quo is suboptimal in ways that could be improved upon. And, this is not quite as tight as I wanted. So the room for improvement, and in both of these, one or both of these areas. And finally, that we're the ones that can do it. Our approach is a good one, and I'm not saying we're not the only ones in this space, but I think we're the ones pushing it forward most in this particular space. So we can either we have the ability to either move the system to a better equilibrium, the academic research system, or even if we can't change the equilibrium, we're going to generate a lot of value through commissioning feedback and public evaluation of impactful research, even if academia happens to remain stuck for a while longer. Okay. I'm going to go quickly on this slide. I did a practice on this and I went way over time, so I'm just kind of jump into things. But here are some of the ways that I think the two groups have complementary problems and complementary strengths. Okay, for example, and by working together can solve problems that neither could solve alone. I mean, that's mathematically that's logically necessary, but that it's meaningfully so. Right. So, for instance, in many areas, those doing EA research have limited expertise, or at least subject matter expertise, or at least credibility in certain areas. Some areas much stronger, but certainly in some areas, I might say, social science, statistics, and economics is what I'm most familiar with. That you have at the academia, but in academia, they're not valuing impact so much. But in the people funding EA aligned research are funding, they really want to fund impact. Academia has limited ability to coordinate innovation. It's very hard for people to step outside. People aren't encouraged to do process innovation. In EA, there's much more willingness to start new systems. There's much more, you might call it agency. I think I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but sorry. So in the collaboration, we're hoping we can bring the strengths of each together and bring sort of some funding for people who, not just in EA, but people who care about the impact of the research. We can build a new system. We can fund that new system by people who care about the value of the research. Academics with that funding will it'll help push academics towards a new system, also bring them into the new system, thinking more about impact, and leverage the strengths here. I don't know if anyone remembers this, the Geedle and the Gonk from Sesame Street. I don't know how long they replayed this, but The one had long arms and couldn't eat the nectarines. The other was short and couldn't reach the nectarines. But that's not solving. What I'm talking about is a case where one group can help solve a collective action problem of the other group. So you might think of an environmental NGO who wants to improve the wildlife stocking of something, and fishermen who are stuck in this bad equilibrium where they're going to overfish, as an analogy. All right. What do I mean by impactful research? It's a huge discussion. I really don't want to go into too much detail about this. And also, we're not very dogmatic about this, but we're trying to provide some guidelines and trying to insist that people consider this. So you can see our discussions at these links, as well as some discussions I've been aware of and engaged in the EA forum. So you could think about, first, you want to design maybe an axiology or a moral framework, and then what is having a positive impact? You want to achieve value according to that framework. That's just a very general way of putting it, and I'm not the best person to discuss this particular, this is a core question of EA, perhaps. How can research support impact? Okay, research is meant to produce truth. Researchers, when I'm in academia, or a lot of academics say we're just seeking the truth, we're not trying to help the world. But seeking the truth, you can seek it in any number of areas. There's sort of an infinite dimensional space, perhaps. Research to support impact needs to produce, arguably it has to be true, useful information, which enables better decision making, which drives choices, which drives better outcomes. There's some ways it can obviously influence resource allocation, funding decisions, produce the nature of policies, how do the interventions work. It could also provide models and logical arguments to improve decision makers' thinking. I don't know if the word epistemics is the right word there. Okay. All right, so where does that bring us? So, so how does what we do help make the world a better place, or at least according to our model? Well, I map out a more extensive path to impact, but you can see some of the, sorry, I messed this up in the past. Maybe you can zoom in yourself, sorry. Some of the key paths are, we're going to focus on impactful research, improve the evaluation of impactful or EA-aligned research, which will make it more rigorous, which will boost its awareness, bring academics in, improve it. It'll also, and then adding some of the norms of open science to it, it'll make the research more reliable. It'll also just improve the research, and which itself makes the research better, obviously. We're going to be paying academics, among others, to evaluate the research. It'll increase their awareness of this research and the ideas of impact. Better impactful research, will inform decision makers better, whether they be in government, philanthropy, etc. Better assessments, better choices, better outcomes for humanity. And those are some key paths. I like to go from tip to tail and not put ellipses. All right, so what are some existing frameworks for prioritizing research? You might be familiar with 80,000 hours. You might be familiar with open philanthropy's focus areas. Note that cause prioritization is not the same as research prioritization. Everyone might agree that a cause or an outcome or even an intervention is particularly useful and important. That doesn't mean that research in that area adds substantial value. So there's other ways of thinking about the prioritization of research. What are the issues that the policymakers, the decision makers, are most uncertain about, where they think that uncertainty is really impactful on the value they'll be able to achieve? More formally, you might consider the so-called value of information. One way of framing that is how much. So my research has the potential to add a certain amount of value. Maybe you never do, but you might even know exactly what question it's going to answer, or answer with what probability, or concentrate your posterior over. What is the gain? How much better off would I be having that more concentrated posterior belief, more, or in a binary case, knowing with greater probability whether something's going to be successful or not? How much does that increase the value of my decision? There's also indirect measures one could consider. Note also, research prioritization is not the same as research evaluation prioritization, which is what the Unjournal is doing when we're prioritizing what research should we commission to be paid, to be evaluated, et cetera. Right? Because it could be the research is very valuable, but actually its quality, there's not much uncertainty over its quality, for instance. I'm just going to skip over. This is the GPI's framework. They talk about, well, this is paraphrasing it. They talk about foundations, theory building. The third thing is the one we're focusing on more, although there'll be, depending on how you define theory, we could be engaging this to some extent. Okay, so let me this slide's a bit busy, but I think it's important to identify what it is that we cover. So I think am I about 20 minutes into the presentation, just to gauge my time here? 15, okay. So I'm gonna go a little quicker over this, speed up a little bit. Human behavior and its consequences. We're focusing on particular fields. So at the moment, we're not covering these other things. Just to know, like, we might in the future expand into other fields, but for now, these other fields aren't in our domain, and or they're being perhaps well covered by other initiatives. We're focusing mostly on work that's sets to say something about the real world using evidence, whether they collected that evidence or analyzed public domain data, but also, simulations, theory, and modeling, if it has direct applications to policy, will fall under our domain. Methodological, less so. These are the things we're not going to cover, or we'll cover much less. Things you might call pure theory, things that produce inputs for other researchers, shallow reviews, and informal discussions. Harder for us to evaluate. We're not others are doing it, maybe. We're not prioritizing it so much now. And then we're bringing work from several sources. Some of the main ones are, well, you can classify it as academic aimed work. We're looking at working paper series, NBER, general population work paper series in a variety of fields. Ideally, we'd like things that aren't just static PDFs. We'd love web page, papers that are web pages where the code and data are linked. So we're mostly looking at things that are publicly released, but at the moment have not yet been published, i.e. peer reviewed in a journal. But we're also evaluating work that has been published in a traditional journal if we think that it's been under-evaluated. And that's particularly true in some fields where the process is very quick. We have a second stream for about 10 to 20% of the work that's not academic aimed, but nonetheless rigorous work. You might say EA aligned work. We're trying to have it looked at by people with expertise who may not even be affiliated with EA. And in terms of what, we're not defining this as our scope, but we, in practice, end up looking at a set of causes and are even dividing our teams according to these outcomes. And here's a quick view. So global health and development, there's a picture of our team at the moment of research associated people. Global health and development economics is a large part of what we do and what we will do. There's things that are, there are things that are more about economics and welfare. There's a psychology team that's going to be prioritizing, that may be prioritizing things like how do we deal with misinformation in the world in ways that matter? How does misinformation spread? Some other teams that are still being defined to some extent, but meta science, innovation, catastrophic risk is a team we're trying to build more people. What are these field specialists doing? These are the people that are helping us find research, prioritize it. When people submit research, decide how to prioritize it. And then the next step will be giving it, when we prioritize it, as I said, giving it to people to manage the evaluation process and then evaluate. We're trying to build more strength in these other areas. Why should research be evaluated? Okay, I kind of alluded to this before, but what are journals doing? The publishing role of journals is not important anymore. Almost not at all. We don't need printed volumes. We have great systems for organizing the information. Most academics are pretty good at producing good formatted documents. If not, they could hire someone. And some are good. Some can produce much better formats than journals allow. I could get into the details of dynamic documents and Quarto. And at the moment, journals are offering this quality control, credibility, and prestige thing. Essentially, they're doing evaluation, but they're doing it in a very crude way. Thumbs up, thumbs down. All sorts of limitations, slow, complicated. Okay. So why is evaluation important? I mean, researchers want feedback. People need to know whether to trust the research. Here's from one context, discussing it from the context of generally empirical, data-driven research. This is the open science, reproducibility, robustness agenda. Some of the ways that research can fail to be trustworthy. But also people need to know so people want to know how much they can trust the research. Even researchers can't read everything and validate for themselves, and in what ways they can use it. We need some process. or at least that can add value. And what research should be funded? There's at least, I think, 1.5 million higher education academics in the United States. A lot of them want more funding. Open philanthropy funds about $20 million in research per year. About 2 to 3% of global GDP goes to R&D. And it's not clear that our current systems are doing a great job at this, but no system would do a worse job, I suspect. We just divided research funds out equally for anyone who wanted them. Now, within effective altruism, there's at least not a standard. There's not any well-known evaluation process. EA Forum has a lot of strengths to it, but it doesn't prioritize expertise. You can thumbs up things if you're just popular. You don't have to be an expert. Academics rarely engage. More technical posts, perhaps outside of some areas like philosophy, get fewer comments and likes. There is some, but it's unclear how much red teaming and things take place. Some organizations, EA researchers, and some university researchers who are EA adjacent do publish in formal academic publications, and that's more true in, let's say, philosophy, but generally when they do, they publish in niche, non-mainstream journals, which may not get as much scrutiny and certainly don't get as much mainstream cachet credibility. I mean, not always, but for the most part. So the question is there a weak underbelly of the research that EA and their funders are relying on? Well, you can look this discussion of this error or inconsistency GiveWell seemed to have, which finally was treated by researchers who did look at this pretty seriously. That this is work of some researchers from HLI, and this did affect GiveWell's recommendation. I'd like to see more of this, and I think if there was more systematic, like what we're doing is trying to hire people to do this stuff to some extent, at least the first step in it. Here's an example of a EA adjacent paper that was published in a traditional journal, but it's a very niche journal. So we decided it was worth reevaluation or separate evaluation. And the evaluation did find what seemed like some substantial limitations and weaknesses to it that had strong potential to reverse the author's conclusion. Thanks to Alex Bates, he won one of our evaluator prizes, and the authors acknowledged this. There's other potential wins here, including where there's research that's taken a long time in the traditional journal pipeline that actually does have a lot of credibility, which we would want to be informed by earlier. Like, for instance, this paper casts some real substantial doubt on the efficacy of cognitive behavioral therapy as an intervention in poor countries. This is one of our award-winning papers. When academics do engage in these areas, we can engage with them more and make the work better. And make the work more usable by other researchers by having this evaluation happen. So this was a paper that I think was somewhat neglected by the authors, who were in fact very prominent economists. There's also areas in which, there's very little, if any, formal academic work or evaluation in economics and related fields, including animal welfare. And our evaluations will hopefully be able to bring that to the fore. There's also cases of major grants being made based on unreviewed papers. Safe evidence. So, for instance, the 65 million GiveWell recommended open philanthropic grant is based on 2 papers, or at least they cited 2 papers, neither of which I saw any evidence of formal peer review. Now, the researchers are great, or they have great track records, won a Nobel Prize. Doesn't mean this research or the conclusions stated are as stated in the papers. Is it being reviewed by peer-reviewed journals? I assume so, but we don't find out. As far as I could tell, nothing was ever reported about this particular paper. And then, this maybe something will come out, but I want it to be faster. I want it to be more informative to people making big grant decisions. So why not just use academic publishing? For many reasons. But we can go back and forth on this, but it doesn't do what we want it to. People are really happy to find a change, to have a new system. And I want to take advantage of that to both help them change the system and help them be more impactful. So what are some of the main problems that we cite that the Unjournal approach, as well as some other approaches, do deal with, but that haven't been pushed so much? So To get a paper published in an academic journal, you can do that a lot by just being just being super clever, just showing like what your way to solve tricky problems are, not necessarily useful problems, tying it to previous research, maybe tying it to priorities and gripes of the editors and referees. Okay, as we said, as I mentioned, a lot of research is published in for-profit journals, which take a certain rent, impose paywalls and barriers. That has a certain cost. It's very frustrating to people. The cost might be 1% of the cost, of university expenditure. It's not the biggest cost, but I think it imposes some limits. And one of the limits also imposed is, as I've mentioned before, there are only certain formats you can publish in a journal. And they say, oh, we're out of space. So therefore, you can't give your actual explanation in a way that people could actually understand it because you didn't have space for that. Or they make you put in it's very hard to put up these new formats that enable people to quickly check the data consistency with the code in many cases. Perhaps the most important one, as I mentioned before, if you go to a luncheon, if you talk to academics, they spend a huge amount of their time just figuring out, where should I submit to next? Where should I publish in next? What conference can I present that will help me publish in this journal? How do I retool my research to get into this type of journal? That doesn't involve making the research better for the most part. Journal shopping, gaming the system, rent seeking. And then another one, maybe I'd say 4 or 5 to me are the most important ones. We don't learn anything from the evaluations. They are private. All we learn is what journal the paper landed. We don't know why. We're trying to address that. Okay, and here you see, all right, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here. Some of the academic complaints about the process. How do we solve these problems? Okay, we are proposing a new system. Evaluations are not linked. We're not publishing the work. We're evaluating a research project at a point in time. We're not claiming ownership. You can improve it. You can get evaluated again. Evaluations are public. We pay evaluators. We're taking steps to make these evaluations credible, some quality control. We're trying to build systems for that. We're trying to have quantifiable aspects of the evaluations. So you can, along different dimensions. And we're focusing on impact as one of the things we're asking evaluators to consider. So we're hoping to move to this new system. Free access to the things we evaluate as well as the evaluation. We're open to any format. We are going to hopefully evaluate work within a month or two, and at that point, you'll know how to judge the work, and the researchers themselves will be able to say, hey, look, my work got an 80 out of 100. That should count towards my career. As I said, we're trying to emphasize things other than cleverness and innovation in a not so useful way. All right, a little bit about our projects. I'm not going to go into it. You see, we have many paths to impact generally related to one another. But we're dealing with this collective action problem, which people might perceive as this, that the first movers will get punished, the latter movers will get rewarded. Why should I jump into this pit? This graph's a little bit confusing because it's not sure if it deals with time or amount, but okay. So this is the complaint. This is what you hear. You hear, okay, yeah, I'd love to be in a new system, but I'm not going to be the first. I'm not going to I need to submit to traditional journals. I'm not going to engage with this new system. It's too risky. I need to get tenure. I need, my university's not going to value this. Or the university will say, we can't value this because the National Exercise doesn't, or the other universities don't. So how do we change this? We change it with funding. Funding changes incentives. We change it with people like myself joining, who are either not traditional academics or who are senior academics who are established and don't have to worry about risks, taking those quote unquote risks. We offer bridging steps. You don't have to jump off the bridge. You can have your paper evaluated by the Unjournal and a traditional journal. We're not exclusive. And we offer rewards for early adopters. And we try to get people to replace their fear of being the first to do something weird or different with a fear of missing out. We want people to think, if I don't join something like this, I'm going to be seen as the old guard, antiquated. And we're trying to make our work unable to ignore. So our evaluations will be made public. Hopefully they'll be on Google Scholar. We're working on that particular channel so that when people do evaluations, when people submit reviews, submit their work to traditional journals, The reviewers will see our evaluations, cannot be ignored. What's our progress so far? I mentioned this already. I'm just going to go on. We've had our pilot phase. We're trying to scale up to about 70 research papers or projects in a variety of areas. You can see we prioritize work, and then we, for evaluation, ... And as I mentioned, we ask the evaluators to not just give descriptive discussions and feedback, but to rate it along a certain number of categories. You can see our dashboard here. We're working on ways to aggregate this expert opinion in ways that will be useful, looking for your feedback, your engagement on this, ways that will be useful to people who would want to use the research. So you can look at the overall scores of the papers we evaluated, along with the authors' expressed confidence intervals. You can also see the different categories we asked to be evaluated. How well does it rate? These are summaries, but we gave them longer descriptions, and even these have longer descriptions. For instance, how much does it engage with real world? How much does it quantify impact? How much is it relevant to practice, et cetera? That's one of the things we emphasize. Alongside other traditional criteria, we are also looking to revise this in a way that will be consistent, theoretically grounded, able to aggregate, and useful to other researchers and research users. A little bit about our workflow, too much to talk about now, but the point is that people can one key point is that people can either submit work, or we will reach out and find work that's made public, that's having an influence on the debate, maybe in policy, and either ask authors or inform authors that we will be evaluating. Skip the workflow. Okay, we're building a team. We built a team. We're trying to fill some gaps, as I mentioned, in field specialists. Yeah, we're building our platforms to aid the scale up. We're trying to work on, again, consulting research users and researchers to improve our criteria. We're trying to build tools and partnerships and explore innovations that will help ground our research in, connect it to real world outcomes. It'll help benchmark it, help make it useful to other people who are hammering away at making research more replicable and useful and connecting it to people who want to use that research. What do we do next? Our pilot's over. How are we going to succeed? We want everyone to be relevant people, at least in universities, et cetera, to be aware of what we do. We build our team, prize workshops, communications, ambassadors. We want people to trust our evaluations. We want to, and have ways that we can convey the credibility of those evaluations, benchmarking them against certain things, having managers and perhaps outsiders rate the evaluations. And then we want to grow to a scope, that is meaningful without compromising quality. And we're building tools, as I said, new systems to make that easier. Some challenges that we have, or milestones we haven't reached yet. We're looking to find some influential people, because once they're on board, other people will jump on board. We have some, fairly prominent academics on board, but there's still some that we would still benefit from some sort of field leaders. We'd love to have more commitment from orgs in the same space. Maybe my own thing, I'd like more people to be submitting work that's not just a PDF. The big fish we're aiming for, and we're looking at ways to try to convince and make it attractive to do this, is for universities and research organizations to value our evaluations as a career metric. We're facing some unanticipated challenges involving author engagement and accessing the most recent version of papers. And then there's some big questions that I'd love more feedback on, we're talking about, in terms of, what should be our criteria for aggregation? How do we provide useful outputs for research users? How much quantification should we ask from evaluators? How much quantified uncertainty? What performance incentives should we provide them? Can we link that to trackable outcomes? How much oversight should we give them? Okay, so how can you help us? This is the last slide. Engage with us. More people involved, more people that mention it, that know about it, that share the information. Submit your work if you're a researcher, at least consider it, talk it over. If you're an early career researcher, we offer certain embargoes and sort of, we can talk about that later. Read and use our work, spread the word. We're looking for partnerships. We're going to be having a prize workshop. We're looking for co-hosts. It's going to be open so anyone can come. We're going to be discussing substantive things having to do with the research, with methods, as well as with how to prioritize and evaluate research. And you might want to join our team, become a paid evaluator. As I don't know if I mentioned, we pay at least $400 per evaluation plus incentives for people with expertise in the relevant areas. You can be a field specialist. You can suggest work to us. We're hiring an ops person, which has a management and perhaps potential to be sort of a director type role, and looking for feedback. All right. I went a little bit over time. Apologies for that.
Yeah, I guess it's okay. Thank you so much, David. Yeah, it was very informative and detailed, and I appreciate how much effort you put into the presentation. So, yeah, maybe we can just like stop the screen sharing and just switch to more kind of formal. So, yeah, I think for the questions, you can just submit the questions to the chat, or you can use the raise hand button on like feature on Zoom and speak up.
Are there any yet on that interface, or no questions there yet?
No, I think there is no questions on Slido. It would be easier to just proceed with Zoom. So there is a question from Emily.
I can see them. It's okay. I'm looking at the chat. It's okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Sasha.
Yeah, it's just like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll just be quicker that way, I think. Yeah, so evaluation process in traditional journals, I mean, depends on which field you're in, but I think in traditional journals, it often, just to get back a response, 3 months is not, I'll answer the other question too, is not unusual. 6 months is not unusual. A year is pretty unusual. But the problem there is that even once you get a response in 6 months, just for economics, it's not a definitive response. I might have 2 very positive evaluations, reviews, and I can't do anything with it if the paper is rejected. For us, we're aiming at asking the evaluators to have a 3-week turnaround. To get the full $400, they're going to be required to have a 3-week turnaround. But in practice, it's taken us sometimes several months. We're aiming to have a much faster process than that. I guess I would say off the top of my head, we'd be aiming to have a turnaround in, let's say, 2 months, which is somewhat better than most journals. But the advantage is, after those 2 months, you would have something that was a rating and evaluation that you could take to your boss. In theory, it will be public, not in theory, it will be public. In theory, this should count towards your career, and other users of the research could say, this research was rated extremely strong in terms of the credibility of the main findings, and they would then be able to benefit from that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Amelie.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Do you work with some like stakeholders in EA community, like open philanthropy, or maybe so like in a way that they would reach out to you to help them, like to, I don't know, make better decisions about, I don't know, the same with the papers you mentioned that were not properly evaluated, but yeah, they made some decisions based on that. So yeah, are you with any of the works? I mean,
one of our team members is in close contact with GiveWell, and they're suggesting research to be evaluated. I guess one thing that I'd be eager to do more of that. I'd be eager to have more contacts with open philanthropy. And I've had some conversations, and I'd like to have a better, improve that pipeline of both them sending things to us to say, hey, this would be a high priority for us, whether to evaluate in your academic or non-academic stream, and us, as well as telling us, like, these are the things we want evaluated, these are our criteria, as well as us having a better pipeline to them to say, all right, this has been evaluated, here are the ways it's been found strong and limited. That communication track is something I'd like to build more of. At the moment, I can say we do have at least a good communications line with GiveWell. Hopefully more going forward. And I'm welcome more suggestions as to how we can do that better. I mean, I think the most obvious thing would be for us to put more posts on the EA forum, which I think most of those groups do read. Sasha, does that get at your question more or less?
Yeah, makes sense. And I would prefer to like ask the questions from the chat.
Okay, good.
Because the people who will be watching the
Good
recording
point.
later, they won't understand, like, if
Good
you're
point.
just replying. Yeah, so the question from Christopher: will there be a tier system, kind of like preprint and the after review, so then we receive feedback like preprint?
You want to continue the question?
Yeah. So he's saying that I think one of the value of putting technical research on EA forum is quick iteration and review, and the comments session. So sometimes engaging quite technically.
Let me do a little bit of like disambiguation or whatever, and then answer some of that. So I think you might be talking a little bit about research being available to the public. And in some of the fields, so in the field we're focusing on most, which is economics, most research is put up as a working paper, a preprint, long before it's received any formal feedback or evaluation, or at least anything that's public. So that itself is not a problem. So the work's already available. It's just there's not much evaluation of it. So how we see our approach to that is we are going to try, when work seems to have the potential for impact, benefit from evaluation, we're going to try to commission people to evaluate it, do the evaluations, have that be public as soon as possible. Now, will we do this in terms of a tier system? I'm not sure. I mean, if that we could, I mean, most systems for evaluating things work pretty well with sort of sorts. You can sort and filter. So I think that's more the model, that if I'm a policymaker or someone wants to use the research, I can say, all right, can you sort this research by how well it was rated toward by this metric, or by the aggregate metric, or by this combination of metrics? I agree with you that you do get a lot of feedback on the EA forum. And yes, the comment section does engage quite technically a lot and provides a lot of value. And I don't see this as like in opposition to that. I don't have time to like engage on all the details because I want to get to some of the other questions, but I think like one thing is that there's certain areas the EA forum does a much better job at engaging with than others, in terms of philosophy and maybe things having to do with the fundamentals of AI safety issues. Some things much less so in terms of statistics and social science and other things. Should I move on to the next question, Sasha? I was cognizant of time.
We have like about 8 minutes left, so we have some space for more questions. Sandy is asking she's saying it seems that a major point for academics is reviewers not having the necessary domain expertise to give useful feedback. And are you worried that letting reviewers give metrics pertaining to the quality of the research or researcher will disincentivize submissions?
So it sounds like two separate questions, which are both interesting ones. So academics often complain about reviewers. I've told we call our things evaluations because we're not going up or down. So I've taught my brain to say evaluators every time I say reviewers, but then I overcorrect. Authors complain that reviews are crap. You get a lot of uninformed feedback. Some of that may be a lack of domain expertise. Some of it might be evaluators not having the right incentives, or these things getting passed down to people who don't care. We're hoping that our evaluations will be better for a few reasons. One is that we're paying for them and offering incentives, and people will perhaps also have the incentive that they want us to call on them again. They're also being made public. We're still deciding whether we should encourage. It's an option now. We're still saying we should encourage or discourage people to put their name at the bottom. But either way, if it's public, I think people will tend to put more care into it. Another thing is we have the ability to source, maybe more than in certain specific fields, specific journals, to source evaluation from people who have, if a paper, let's say, engages in both computer science and economics, to engage in it, find experts from both areas. Now, to get at the question of, will this discourage people from submitting their work? I think I can treat that also. One thing is people might be discouraged by any public evaluations of their work. And I have long discussions with authors and potential authors as why that shouldn't really discourage you, or at least in many cases, it shouldn't discourage you. I mean, in principle, you should demonstrate a lot of confidence in your work and have the willingness to make it public. And that itself should be a sign of your confidence in the quality of your work. In our system, if you get criticized, well, in the traditional system, if you get criticized by a reviewer, you really have no recourse to respond. True, it's not public, but you've been rejected. You might be rejected time and time again with the same uninformed critique. In our system, you have the opportunity to respond publicly. We give the authors the opportunity to respond publicly to those critiques, which might help, change the opinion. And we're also working with thinking about systems to allow sort of revisions or revised evaluations. You also, I think, senior and seasoned people realize that all research gets criticized. For research to be quote unquote published in top journals, it has to go through long periods of criticism where it's presented very often at seminars and everyone knows the critiques. So why not have that public? Those are some of the cases. And also, why do you think it's going to be a negative? It might be that people already were doubtful of your work. Maybe these metrics will, on average, they should improve people's opinion of your work. That said, we've had some trouble getting submissions, and our original approach was to be submission-based, but now we've pivoted a little bit. We're going to hope to pivot back to finding work that is already having an influence, that's published by quote-unquote top researchers in top journals, and just evaluating that to normalize it and to show what we can do and to show that it's not shameful, and to give it a bit of a halo and a warm glow of being associated with top work. So yeah, I hope that answers the question in the spirit that it was asked.
Yeah, thanks, David. So do we have any other questions? Let's see. Yeah, but we are right on time. I guess it's even good that we spent a bit more time on presentation, and you could unpack more details throughout the presentation.
Yeah, and I know I talked rather quickly. I think there's actually there's some cool tools built into Zoom now. You can say summarize the past, summarize this. So that might be a fun thing to try, like these AI tools. But really, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on. Oh, thanks, Sandy. Yeah, appreciate it. She says public responses with the option for evaluators to revise comments seem like a really good idea. I hope that all the answers are available to you at unjournal.org, as I said, with the chatbot. If they're not, just ask me. I want people to be involved. I want people to know like the basics of what we do and why, and I want to engage, because every time I go to meetings, I get a lot of good feedback and suggestions. So I really appreciate suggestions.
Yeah, and right. So Sandy asked about the copy of the recording. So in case you joined late or you want to rewatch the presentation later, it will be published on EA Anywhere YouTube channel. I just dropped a link in the chat.